My sermon this morning is called Lessons from Jail. Now, first, let me say I have never actually been in jail, but for the past 8 years, I've worked at the Illinois Youth Center, which is a prison for teenage boys. I coordinate a volunteer tutoring program there. Working there allows me to live out my UU values every day, particularly the part about all people being worthy and the belief that we are all connected. In the words of Father Gregory Boyle, founder of Homeboys Industries, every moment, it turns out, is an invitation to recognize our interconnectedness. You are the other me, and I am the other you. I highly recommend Father Boyle's 2 books, Tattoos on the Heart and Barking to the Choir. He speaks of radical acceptance, accepting people as they are, not just tolerating them, but accepting their right to be who they are. He says in 30 years, he has never seen an evil person. He's seen people who were broken, who were desperate, who were mentally ill, but never evil. Some people would call the young men that I work with super predators, and one person has told me they should all just be lined up and shot. Over and over again, the message my students get from society is that they are worthless, and many times they absorb that message and believe there is no other choice or reality, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They give up hope for the future and expect to be dead or in prison by the time they're 25, and too often they just quit trying, and that is what happens. Perhaps some of you have watched the TED Talk titled The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I highly recommend it. On its simplest level, you can interpret it as a caution against stereotypes. It explains that if you base your life or your beliefs about someone else based on a single story, you risk a critical misunderstanding. And you can lock yourself or let other people lock you into a single story. But we're each more than a single story. Fortunately, some of our students do persevere and they work to break the stereotype. I spoke at a graduation ceremony at the youth center, and I told the students to remember that their time at the center is just one chapter of their lives, that the rest of the book has not been written, that each one of them can make better choices and become the hero of their story. I told them they are all more than the worst thing that they have ever done. They are more than the worst thing they have ever done, as are we all. And we are all more than just one story. Our faith teaches us that every human being is worthy, that there is no other. We are all connected. Our lives all intersect. Opening our hearts and minds and looking beyond the stereotypes isn't always easy. Sometimes it's hard. But to quote another wise man, Mr. Rogers, love isn't a perfect state of caring. It's an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is, right here and now. Let me tell you a story. I was asked to work with a very troubled young man who couldn't be in the general population. He was very outspoken in his views, which included his hatred of all minorities and anyone who was different in any way. This was a problem since most of the youth and many of the staff at the youth center are African American. He also hated Jews and didn't believe in the Holocaust. He believed that everything on the news, everything on the internet was propaganda. It was all lies, and that you couldn't believe any of it. I asked him how to find out what was true, and he said, "You have to talk to someone who knows." And I asked him, who would that be? And he said, my father. Now, this would be the same father that gave his infant son a name that translated to angel of death. So, many people would consider this young man evil. He had certainly done some bad things. But I saw a young man who had been indoctrinated, probably since birth, in a certain ideology. And on top of that, he was mentally ill. Certainly a tragic combination, but that doesn't make him evil. He's more than a single story, and he's more than the worst thing he's ever done. If we believe there is no other and that everyone is worthy, we have to include him. Here are some more tales from the jail to consider. Devante was a big kid with tattoos everywhere. You would not want to meet him in a dark alley or anywhere else. He was very intimidating. But one day he came up to me in the hall and he said in a whispery voice, I got a letter. Will you read it to me? I said, sure, bring it in tomorrow, which he did. And it was a letter from his girlfriend, and he couldn't read. So I read it to him several times, and I told him I would help him write a letter back to her. So the next day he dictated a letter to me, and I wrote down exactly what he said. I read it back to him, and after just a couple of revisions, we were done. He copied it in his own handwriting and sent it to her. And after that, Devante became a regular visitor to the tutoring office, and he worked hard at learning to read. And he was always quiet, always polite, and he talked in that whispery voice. Another student, Robert, was a little different. He was another big kid, but he was kind of awkward and didn't show much expression, but he was really smart. He came up for tutoring one night and asked if he could talk to me. I said, sure. And he said very seriously, alone. I said, sure. And there was a room right there with lots of windows and 2 security guards nearby. So Robert and I went in and sat down. He paused a few seconds and then he looked at me very gravely and said, my girlfriend broke up with me. He was devastated. This was another situation that had to be talked through, and finally I suggested he write her a letter, and we talked about what he might say. He was thrilled with the idea and said he didn't need any help writing it. As we stepped out of the room, Robert said to me, could you give me a hug? At which point the security guys went absolutely still. And I said, of course, Robert. And I gave him a big hug, after which he went on to be tutored. I looked at the guards and I said, his heart has been broken. We've all been there, right? And they didn't say a word. To quote Dorothy Day, we have all known the long loneliness, and we've learned that the only solution is love, and that love comes with community. I don't spend all my time giving advice to the lovelorn. I spend most of my time tutoring and coordinating volunteers, and it's seldom boring. Sometimes the young men do amazing things. I held an essay writing contest a couple of years ago, and first prize was a milkshake from McDonald's, which, as you can imagine, was, a big deal. So when I handed over the milkshake to the winner, he said, wow, it's been a long time since I had anything like that. But before he even tasted it, he poured some of it into the hands of his friend so his friend could enjoy it too. And his generosity just touched my heart. Actually, a lot of funny things happen as well. Like the time a youth told me that I looked like someone he'd seen in a movie. So, I stood up a little straighter and, like, really? And very seriously, he answered, yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire. He obviously meant it as a compliment. So I swallowed my pride and I said, oh, thank you. Kind of grandmotherly, right? And he said, yeah. Another day, a troubled youth asked me if I was afraid of him, and I said, should I be? And he replied, no, you're gang gang. So I have no idea what that means, but I got that going for me. I'm gang gang. More recently, I was having a conversation with a student who was complaining about having to learn the weights of the planets for Earth science. He said, when am I ever going to need to know that? And I'm thinking to myself, never. But I was trying to formulate a reasonable response when he continued, and anyway, I don't believe in space, which was spoken like a true teenager. Sorry to the teenagers in the back there, but so I had no reply to that. He didn't believe in space. Okay. So I have one last story for you. I had a student named Alan who had high anxiety, and I had him sit on one of those balls made out of an exercise ball, and I gave him a stress ball to manipulate. And even with these things, he had trouble settling down. He would make random loud popping noises with his mouth, and he would talk loudly to other people in the room, distracting everyone. But nevertheless, we persevered, and eventually he graduated from high school. He left our program, but I would still see him when he came up to see his mentor. And one night, his mentor brought him some much coveted fast food with an abundance of condiments. I was in my office and Alan came in with 2 big handfuls of ketchup packets, saying, here, I thought you could use these. And I thanked him profusely because I knew it was a gift of love and gratitude for how I'd helped him. And he had nothing else to give me. We are all more than a single story. We are all more than the worst thing we've ever done. And we are all connected. In closing, I have another quote from Father Boyle. It is true enough that we could make the world more just, equal, and peaceful, but something holds us back in all our complicated fear and human hesitation. It's sometimes just plain hard to locate the will to be in kinship, even though at the same time, it's our deepest longing. So no matter how singularly focused we may be on our worthy goals of peace, justice, and equality, they actually can't happen without an undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And that's my sermon. Thank you.